6 decades ago, a program started that would change the course and conversation of social work education in the West and across the nation. I've had the pleasure of being faculty associate and a co-instructor through the years here. I've taught at the Tucson campus on ground as well as online. What amazed me about the program is how well prepared ASU's School of Social Work was for online instruction when the COVID-19 pandemic began nearly 2 years ago. When many other institutions were in response mode, this program already had an online format and so many supports in place to help both students and faculty make the transition from on ground to online. That is the way of ASU, forward, innovating, and anticipating the future needs of the next generation of social workers. With my research area of expertise being grief, chronic illness, and disability and its intersections, I would like to unpack the concept of grief in the 21st century. COVID-19 has changed the course of our lives. This pandemic, with no end in sight, has been devastating, and we are living with loss after loss with each wave. With these losses, grief is sure to follow. With much that is still uncertain about the months ahead, one thing is clear. We must understand what this trauma does to us, both individually and collectively. I plan to discuss grief, its dimensions, COVID-19 impacts, and what steps we can collectively take toward healing. Increased depression rates due to continuous traumas regarding infection rates, economic hardship, health disparities, and systemic racism are all very real. We are social distancing and quarantining and protecting ourselves in our community. And while we're doing this, we are taking away our biggest buffers against trauma, the people in our lives. Interpersonal support is the single best predictor of human resilience, thereby undermining our single most important protective factor. All of this, coupled with the uncertainty of the future, makes it hard to recover emotionally. As essential workers with enormous pressures, social workers have given up so much, and right now, we're all going to have a harder time before things get better. Experiencing trauma during a pandemic upends the way we experience grief. These are not normal times, yet our lives are still unfolding in unpredictable ways. Some of us are losing loved ones to COVID. Others are losing family members for reasons unrelated to COVID. The guidelines of quarantine and the changes in social interaction make grieving more desolate, more isolated, and much more complicated. For those grieving celebrations with loved ones and other significant life milestones, the process of redefining the experience is challenging. For those who are at the end of life, we cannot be with our loved ones in their moment of death. We cannot visit those grieving because of social distancing. It feels like we cannot properly pay our respects. We cannot hug our loved ones or provide any physical comfort. Memorial services are done largely online or at a distance, thereby diminishing the physical affection and intimacy of the grieving process and rituals associated with end of life. Some ways in which our grief can manifest are emotional and affective, consisting of rapid change of mood, feeling of intense sadness and anger and guilt, feeling numb and in a state of disbelief. Behavioral, not knowing how to respond to what's happening, avoiding others, blaming others, neglecting others and oneself. Physical, experiencing a decrease in energy, feeling fatigued, having changes in eating and sleeping patterns, showing physical signs of stress, having headaches and hypersensitivity. Psychological, feeling that your mind is distracted and that you might be unable to focus or concentrate. Cognitive and spiritual, because we're in pandemic mode, as rational beings, we seek answers. We want to find meaning in the loss. We ask ourselves, why me? Why them? Why now of all times? The practices of meditation, rituals, and solace induce a heightened state of consciousness, reflection, awareness, and focused attention. These practices can reduce stress, manage anxiety, reduce inflammation, and improve memory and attention. Information-seeking strategies may help those grieving to understand their responses. Support groups and creative cultural events that we have just discussed are some ways to deal with grief. My approach to survivability in this time, my call to action is to look to the community. Embrace what defines you during this time. Feeling part of something in the time of COVID-19 is important. Also, each person, family, and community grieves differently. Grief is a response to experiencing a sudden detour from the path we thought our life was going to take and sends us into uncertain territory. We have gone from life as it was to a new normal. Between the social pressure, feelings of shame grief can bring, and varying interpretations of what is acceptable, our community needs resources for coping and dealing with the emotional heaviness of this time. I'll first discuss a global community of support and then a cultural tradition that is rooted in honoring the lives of those who are no longer physically with us. We don't grieve in isolation. The goal of the Death Cafe is to educate and help others become more familiar with end of life and to be able to have free discussion about topics pertaining to death. The nonprofit originated with Swiss sociologist and anthropologist Bernard Crotaz, who organized the first cafe in 2004. John Underwood, a UK web developer, was inspired by this work and formalized the Death Cafe model in 2011. He was instrumental in the spread of the idea. Death cafes have since been held in 66 countries. Tucson, where I live, was the third city in the US to begin a death cafe. The more people feel comfortable talking about end of life and sharing about death in their lives, the more fear and anxiety will lessen and the more natural it will become to take care of loved ones when they are dying. After all, as we know, death is entirely intermingled with life. Death cafes have ultimately helped to address the taboo of speaking about death, particularly with people we don't know, and encourages people to express their own wishes for when they die. The open-ended discussions also provide an avenue to express thoughts about one's own life stirred up by the death of a family member, such as the grief in the time of COVID. You can access the cafes virtually during this time, and you can explore this resource at deathcafe.com. In addition to support groups, cultural celebrations honoring loved ones can be a fundamental part of the healing process, as culture can often inform how we respond to grief. We are approaching Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, a tradition first practiced by indigenous peoples in Mexico. They didn't consider death the end of one's existence, but simply another chapter of life. Rather than grieve their dead, they celebrated the lives of the deceased and honored their memories. During Dia de los Muertos, they believed the dead had a brief window to leave the spirit realm and visit their loved ones in the mortal world. The holiday is now celebrated around the world, and while every region of the country has its own particular way of celebrating the event, the common denominator is the remembrance of a family's departed loved ones who are visited at cemeteries and honored by an altar that includes the meals, drinks, and items favored by the deceased. This celebration gives people the opportunity to process grief through the performing and visual arts while finding community in their collective and universal feeling of grief. Tucson nonprofit, Many Mouths, One Stomach, is a collective of artists, teachers, and community activists who come together with the intent to create, inspire, manifest, and perpetuate modern festal culture. Their flagship event, the All Souls Procession, began as an individual performance piece by Tucson artist Susan Johnson in 1990. 31 years later, the All Souls Procession has become one of the most authentic public ceremonies in North America today. Over 150,000 people from all walks of life come together every fall in downtown Tucson to commemorate, honor, mourn, and celebrate the passing of our ancestors and loved ones. In the months leading up to the procession, free family-friendly workshops are offered to the public. In addition, Many Mouths, One Stomach gives people the opportunity to experience the event through projects like the Urn and the Video Ancestry Project. And now you can experience it too. You can learn more about this on manymouths.org and allsoulsprocession.org. Cheers to 60 years ASU School of Social Work. Here's to 60 more years and beyond of creating the next generation of social workers who will work towards solving the unique problems of the 21st century with both creativity and a cross-cultural perspective.